prepare yourself for the Warning Woods 2024 Halloween special, The House Across the Water. This is chapter 1 of a 5-part story, so be sure to listen to each part in order. A new chapter will be released each day until the story reaches its harrowing conclusion at the dawn of Halloween. Be ready. Without further ado, allow me to take you to Lorna Shallows and the house across the water. I see a house across the lake, so evil, dark, and lonesome. It steals the beauty of this place, so wonderful and wholesome. Why does that house seem so alive? Its shadows fall my way, shifting closer over time, creeping towards me on the waves. This is the first stanza of a poem I wrote in 5th grade. I'm no Robert Frost, but I was 10, so cut me some slack. Ms. Geralt assigned us to write a poem about our summer vacation by the end of the first week of school. I chose to write about my family's trip to Lorna Shallows, where we rented a lake house for 5 days. Lorna Shallows is a largely private area. Only a few houses on the water are rentals. The majority are occupied by their wealthy owners during the summer and either sit empty or house relatives and friends during the rest of the year. Rental or not, every house near the shore looks stunning. That is to say, all but one. The house I wrote about in my poem. That house loomed across the inlet behind ours. My bedroom window looked out at it. It seemed, although desolate and empty, like a husk for some sinister vitality. A mockery of life, perhaps. I imagined it sending long tendrils or roots out through the water toward our little dock. I received this image like a radio signal, and it stuck with me. Recently, while going through boxes of old things in my parents' attic, I found my poem in a binder simply labeled Tyson, 5th grade. Reading it brought everything that happened in Lorna Shallows back so vividly, I'm forcing myself to sit and write it all down. I'm still not really sure what good it will do, but I have an urge to get it all out regardless. If you are someone about to take in my story, no, I do not expect you to believe it. What happened to me and my family at Lorna Shallows is unbelievable by most people's standards. It involves things I, even at 10 years old, believed to be fiction. These days, I am far less skeptical. My parents learned about Lorna Shallows while searching for a vacation destination far from noisy tourists, long lines, and heavy traffic. It's on the far north side of Lake Lorna, between 2 sets of hills. We drove through the wooded hills to the east to get there, and could see the rocky western hills across the water when we arrived. Somewhere in those rocky hills hid the Lorna Caverns, the area's only attraction. Some of the bigger caverns and chambers were open to the public, while some of the more complex routes could only be accessed with a licensed guide. Others were available only to spelunkers with the utmost experience and were willing to sign waivers forfeiting rescue should they become trapped. Our house was the only rental on the street. Dad said that was a good thing because the rest of the houses would probably be empty or inhabited by respectful guests. I bet they'll keep to themselves if they're around at all, he said. People who can afford to own properties like this might be the same species as us, but they're different breeds. Mom rolled her eyes, sure she had a week of listening to fun quips like that ahead. I didn't really know what he meant until later, but by then I would have to disagree. The friend I made out there, who you will meet later, was definitely the same breed as me. Our rental house backed right up to the water. You could practically step onto our dock from the sliding door in the dining room. The first floor was mostly open besides a half wall separating the kitchen/dining area from a windowless den. I assume the lack of windows was intentional, as the den doubled as a miniature movie theater and arcade. A giant projector screen dominated the far wall, and in the back corner stood an emulator with every classic Nintendo, Sega, and PlayStation game. All the bedrooms were on the second floor as well as a half bathroom. There was a full bathroom off of the master bedroom with heated floors, a jacuzzi, a huge mirror, and, the subject of many of Dad's jokes that week, a bidet. My room was far less exciting, but I still liked it. The walls, floor, and ceiling were all made of wood, and it smelled like a men's formal wear store. My favorite thing might have been the loft bed. Something about sleeping up high felt exciting to me. Possibly the most striking part of my room, though, was the window that, if I stood on the built-in bench in front of it, still stood a foot taller than me. The ceiling slanted, cutting a wedge in the window. The whimsical shape it created made me feel like a character in a storybook. The window had an aura of magic. That is, until I looked through it. Until I saw the house across the water. But now I'm getting ahead of myself. I should take a moment to fully introduce my big sister, Claire. She had just turned 14 that summer, but didn't look that much older than me. Sometimes people asked if we were twins. She tended to stay indoors and read or play video games. I, in contrast, was an active kid who could not stand being stuck inside. Claire and I got along, but due to our differences, we were not especially close. We simply didn't have much in common. Claire took the room down the hall from mine. It also had a big window, but hers faced the trees between our property and the next one. She had a cheery view of birds and squirrels, whereas my view contained no cheer at all. Not with that house in the middle of it. I could not help but stare at that house whenever I found myself near the window. Its roof came to a peak in the middle. Like ours, it backed up to the water and had an empty dock behind it with a small motorboat parked beside it, covered by a brown tarp. A second-story deck on wobbly stilts leaned against the back wall. This wall was cut in half by 8 glass panels, forming a giant window. Many of the panes were cracked, and all looked dusty, even at a distance. I think the house had once been painted white or perhaps baby blue, but the paint had mostly been stripped by the wind, leaving the siding a patchy brown color. Forest green moss clung to the exposed siding, colonizing each crack and crevice. It did appear to be one of the older houses near the water, but its state had more to do with neglect than age. I think the most unnerving aspect of the old house might have been how empty and lonely it felt to me. My first sight of the battered eyesore convinced me it was abandoned. I could not imagine anyone living in such a desolate place. Far back behind this deserted home, the West Hills loomed, and somewhere within them, the Lorna caverns dug deep into the earth. Everything across the water, to me, felt as shadowy and cold as those ancient caves. Mom and Dad wanted to go for a walk to the Marina after dinner. There was a little row of shops down there, some open during the off-season, others not. I complained about being tired and told them I didn't want to go. It seemed like they were going to force me to join until Claire also said she felt like staying back. Claire had made Mom and Dad promise not to force her into any of the activities they did that week because, as she put it, she needed a vacation too. Unwilling to leave her alone so soon after arriving in the unfamiliar area, our parents told me I could stay back after all, as long as I stayed with Claire. I agreed, knowing what would happen as soon as Mom and Dad closed the door. I had made this hollow promise dozens of times before. Claire didn't want my company any more than I wanted to be stuck with her. I left Claire inside and walked down to our dock for the first time. The inlet lapped toward me lazily. The little wave tops looked especially black against the pink reflection of the sunset, which painted the rest of the water. The dock wobbled beneath my bare feet, making me dance against my will. I sat at the end with my legs dangling. Only my toes could reach the water. It felt delightfully cold. I tried to focus on the beautiful lake expanding from the inlet, the lush trees surrounding it, the vibrant sky above. But the ominous house across the water continually pawed at my attention. I finally succumbed to the impulse to study it again. New details I observed in the fading light included shingles hanging from the edge of the roof, a prominent crack in the chimney, and thick cobwebs woven beneath the sagging back deck. Further evidence, in my mind, of abandonment. Lost in observation, I was startled by something brushing against my wet toes. It felt slick and warm in the brief moment it touched me. I pulled my legs up to safety before gripping the dock and peering down into the water. A buoy of pale skin bobbed in the rippling waves. I could make out the bony lumps of a spine and ribs about the same size as mine. The short brown hair floating in front of the torso, hiding the face, told me the body probably belonged to a boy. His limbs drifted below him, listlessly. The body bumped into the dock. I felt its gentle impact. Bubbles erupted from the boy's downturned mouth, and his body slowly sank below the surface. I watched intently, wanting to scream but unable to find my voice. Besides, there was no one within earshot besides maybe Claire, who most likely had headphones on anyway. A sudden, enormous splash forced a scream out of me, though. The boy burst upward, arms stretched toward me, wanting to drag me in like Jason at the end of Friday the 13th, a movie which I would see a few years later. I fell back on my elbows. The dripping, pale boy caught the edge of the dock and pulled himself halfway up, but then gave up. From laughing too hard. "You should see your face right now," the healthy living boy laughed. "Who are you?" I asked angrily, still coming down from the shock he gave me. "I'm Brett," he said. He dragged his legs up and spun around to sit in front of me. "I live in the house next door. I came out here to swim and saw you spacing out." "I wasn't spacing out," I lied. "Well, you didn't notice me swim all the way over here from our dock," said Brett. "That's why I decided to scare you." I looked down the bank and saw Brett's dock jutting out through cattails. I couldn't understand how I had missed him. Or wait. Yes, I could. The house. That should give you an idea of its power to captivate me. "I thought you were a real dead body," I said. He laughed again and howled, "I know." Before I realized it, I was laughing too. He had executed the prank with finesse. He got me good, and I knew I could either be sore about it or join in the fun. "I'm Tyson, but everyone calls me Ty," I said. "My family doesn't live here. We're just renting this house for a few days." Brett said, "Yeah, that's what most people do. A lot of boring people with no kids rent this house, so I'm glad you're here this time. Got any siblings?" "Just a sister, Claire, but she's..." I struggled with what to say for a second. "She doesn't go outside much." "Is she hot?" Brett asked. Had I known him longer than 2 minutes, I would have shoved him off the dock. He flinched away like he expected me to do just that, and we both laughed again. Brett and I talked for a while. I learned that his family spent most of the year in Lincoln, Nebraska, where his dad ran some big agricultural equipment company. I wish I could remember the name of it. You know how it is as kids. You don't pay much attention to what grown-ups do unless it directly affects you. Brett's mom worked part-time for some real estate agent in the Lincoln area and volunteered with the rest of her time. He went to a private school in Nebraska, but the teachers let him complete part of the year remotely. Apparently, many of the students in his class spent time at second homes. He said his family didn't usually stay in Lorna Shallows for long during the off-season, so it was lucky he was still there when I showed up. For my part, I told Brett basically everything I've told you about my family so far. My parents returned from their walk sooner than I'd expected, or maybe I just lost track of time. After Brett swam home, Mom scolded Claire for letting me go out and meet strangers alone, and me for not obeying her orders to stay with Claire. I brushed it off easily enough. Having made a friend for the week, I found myself in high spirits with nothing but excitement for the days ahead. It wasn't until I went up to bed that night that I was reminded of the desolate house across the inlet. The sky looked beautiful that night. I could see millions of stars and the half moon high in the peak of the window from my bed. I would have loved to lay there staring at them as I fell asleep, but I had to get up and close the curtain. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I felt that decrepit house across the inlet staring back at me, as if the 8 panes of its giant rear window were the eyes of a crouched spider waiting for a chance to strike. You've just listened to Chapter 1 of the Warning Woods 2024 Halloween special, The House Across the Water. A new chapter will be released each day until October 31st, Halloween. Subscribe to this channel or follow this podcast to be notified when each new chapter is released. If you're listening to this in the future, well then find Chapter 2. This was only the beginning. Things at Lorna Shallows are about to get evil. Stay tuned.